Good morning, folks. It's Wednesday, May the 23rd, and I'm here with Mark Garang. This is his second time on the show, and because Gino has decided to leave off some, and Mark's agreed to fill in when he can, and maybe even once a month. We'll see how it works out. For those of you who don't know Mark, he's a newspaper publisher, the Conway Sun, Berlin Sun, Laconia Sun, and the Portland Phoenix.
That's correct.
And now we're just talking about a new venture that he's involved in, which probably will come up during the show. But welcome, Mark.
Well, thanks, Tom. Good morning.
Yeah.
Thanks for welcoming me back.
Bill, our producer, has given us a question. Just put it on the table. So we'll begin with this. After the school shooting in Parkland, Florida, President Trump promised, quote, immediate action, unquote, on gun safety in schools, including raising the minimum age for assault rifle purchases, implementing universal background checks, and taking guns from, quote unquote, troubled people. So far, none of these actions have been taken. Do you foresee anything changing after the recent school shooting in Texas? You want to grab that? Or?
You can start.
I think the political pressure is going to require that he continue to do things. After Parkland, he saw that it needed attention, at least politically, because there was a huge uproar. I mean, that seemed to be the shooting that got more people upset than all of the previous ones, and there have been many dozens, including that one in Connecticut that was so horrendous with second graders and so forth. And so he invited everyone to the White House, and let them in the media as well, and seemed to disarm the political pressure for him to oppose NRA policy. Now, NRA is a big supporter. He had Trump's base is a big NRA people, and he did go against them, saying that he did not want to see 18-year-olds be able to buy. Now,
He's backed off all that, though.
Has he publicly said it?
I think so. I
don't think he's done. I know he hasn't done anything.
Right. Okay, so we'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
What do you think should be done outside of Trump?
Well, I've written about this quite a few times, and I believe more people should be armed in school. I think carrying those teachers who want to could carry in school, and as well as having highly trained people but you can't be everywhere at once in a building unless you limited entrance to the school to one door, and then perhaps had metal detectors. I believe in physically hardening the schools.
So you don't
more
think
so
about,
than gun control, general population gun control.
So you don't want to
measures.
address any of the problems that lead us to have all these mass shootings. You just want to make schools fortresses and give teachers guns?
I would not just, but in addition to that, I would do something about mental health, because that, I think, is a big part of it. And yeah.
Okay, well, here's my take on that. I mean, one, I think arming teachers is ridiculous. I mean, police officers are trained all day, and when they shoot at people, they miss 3/4 of the time. So it's just Army people, most people will say that's a ridiculous idea to have regular people who should be teaching having guns. There's going to be more trouble than it's going to be worth, and it doesn't make sense. And most of these schools already have special resource officers there. Didn't help. But anyway, besides that, and I'm a gun guy. I have guns. I hunted. I used to hunt. I was brought up in a hunting family. But this is the one statistic that I always go to, is that when you compare major factors in Western society, in other countries, video games usage, mental health, suicides, all those things are all grouped in one. Western Europe, South Korea, we're all grouped in one spot in terms of the date of how much we are afflicted by these things, right? Except the number of guns in the country. So there's us. So if there's a graph, there's us in literally Yemen, way over here in terms of the number of guns that we have per 1,000 people.
The country of Yemen,
Yeah.
South Saudi Arabia. Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's just
Has a lot of guns.
yeah, it's obviously it's a totally nutty place.
Yeah.
So to me, that's the thing. So we can work on mental health all day long. We can do all this stuff, but I think even gun advocates, to me, it's a healthy acknowledgement to say there are just too many guns. I mean, there's always nutty people, and if they have access to guns, this is going to happen more often. And I don't know what the answer is, because I don't think we're never going to confiscate guns. You know, the AR-15s, there are millions of them out there, even if we made them legal. Although that's a separate argument, because I always say, well, if you can't have an M16, then why can we have an AR-15? You know, because AR-15 is closer to military than certainly a shotgun and handguns and hunting rifles.
Yeah.
You know, so where do you draw the line? But I just think that's a recognition. I think it's a healthy recognition to say, we just have a lot of guns. And then the other thing is that when you compare it against, and this is the other piece about that, you compare it to the auto industry, and then we have like 50 times fewer deaths on the roads than we did in the 30s and 40s and 50s, like per million miles, right? So people were, you know, we had 50,000 deaths like in the 50s, and we've got like 30,000 now. Because of incrementally, now nobody back then, when we were people being slaughtered on the highways, nobody said, let's ban cars. What they did is they incrementally made things safer. Whether it's bumpers, whether it's airbags, whether it's driving, DWI thing, all those things have led to a decrease. So that's, to me, is the application with guns. Somehow just chip away and make little things safer, you know. And I don't know the details about background checks, but it seems to me that we should have, whatever that means, we should have universal background checks. I mean, I know you can buy guns, and I mean, there's a whole debate about that. I don't think between family members, or there's a whole bunch of things that are exceptions, but it just seems like you can tighten up on a lot of those things. And I'll just leave my last thing is that this is the question with the latest Texan shooting, where the kid just basically took his dad's handguns and a shotgun, right?
Yeah.
Is that should a parent, if you have a swimming pool in your backyard and some kid comes over and drowns, you're responsible for that. So why shouldn't it be for a firearm? Like, should you not be responsible enough that if somebody's, even your son, gets your guns, should you not be held responsible? Seems reasonable to me.
Okay, so I didn't understand what you were alluding to when you started off, and you talked about different Western European countries as well as South Korea and their research into what causes.
I'm just saying,
different kinds of gun violence.
You take the incidence of a lot of things, like incidence of mental health. Like, we're not crazier than South Korea or Australia or Western Europe. We're not. We don't have a higher suicide rate. We don't have, I mean, so I'm saying is that we're all pretty much the same. So people say, oh, let's work on mental health. Fine, maybe that's one piece of it.
You mentioned video games.
And video games. And I believe, frankly, that if you have 50 million, 30 million lonely white kids looking at video games, it desensitizes them to that kind of violence.
All right.
And yeah, maybe a few of them will go off the edge because of that.
Yeah.
But we're no different. I guess the point is, we're no different than they still play games in Australia and South Korea and all that. The only thing that we stand out compared to those countries is guns per capita. I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying that's just the facts.
Okay. I think that my biggest point about not having more gun control would be the availability of guns in the United States has not really changed since the 50s, 60s, 70s, and yet these incidents have. And so something's happened to us as a culture. When I first started at Freiburg Academy, as I've said before in my column, is the kids would come in November. There'd be semi-automatic rifles, deer rifles, in the back of pickup truck windows on gun racks. Yeah. So they were coming to school with them, And this was true not just in Freiburg, at Freiburg Academy, but everywhere around rural areas. And so, but there wasn't a problem with school shootings. Something's happened to the United States and to young people, and I can't point to a particular, even 2 or 3 or 4, well, I could. I mean, the suicide rate has also gone up. Teen suicide has tripled, quadrupled since that time. Young men, now are expecting, well, males in the United States, white males in the United States especially, have a declining life expectancy. The incidence of drug use, alcoholism, is a big factor in that, as well as just suicide absent, drug use. And so something's wrong with young men. And
young white men.
yes, and if you look at the demographic of school shooters, I wouldn't even call them men. Most of them are boys.
Yeah.
They're white kids, around 14, 15 years old, and it's something's wrong with them. I mean, we've had I know during my teaching career, the emphasis was on girls. We need public schools have to do something about young women and their self-esteem and steering them into science, technology, math, etc. Kinds of courses and lots in Title IX funds going toward athletics and so forth. And young men have been considered to be problematic and diagnosed with ADHD and given drugs and much more so than girls. And very few scholars would look at those trends early on. I mean, a few like Christina Hoff Sommers, The War on Boys, but it's becoming even more prevalent. Something's going on there, and I've been specific about certain trends, but I would put school shootings together with that whole set of other pathologies.
And I agree with that. I think it's a lot. I mean, the fact that it is a certain group, it's young white guys.
Yeah.
That there's just a loss of, it's not happening in the black communities. I mean, the ghetto is the most violent, and the reason is because as dysfunctional as it is, they have a sense of community. I mean, the gang could be the community, but it's a sense of community. So these white young guys, they tend to be loners, right? I mean, they're mostly loners.
Yeah.
So somehow they're dropping off the radar screen. And to me, it's always numbers. 40 years ago, 30% of the young white guys would go back on the farm or get a job in a factory when they were in high school. So they had a place to go. So part of one piece of it is just the changing nature of jobs. They're left out. Right, they're left out.
That would be a factor, I'd say.
So, and then the decline of family structure. Rural. A lot of these people are rural.
That coincides.
And so you get all these factors, and that doesn't make an excuse of a whole generation of lonely. There's a lot of lonely young white guys, but out of those millions and millions and millions, and then you pop a few that are really disturbed enough to do something crazy like this, and they didn't get a hold of guns. I mean, probably both of us knew people in high school that if they could get a hold of AR-15, there would have been trouble. I mean, just crazy people that would just want to, fights and things that were people were just totally out of control, but because nobody had a gun on them,
well,
that things didn't happen.
AR-15 is really, functionally is no different than those guns that were in the back of those pickup trucks. They were semi-automatics, and an AR-15 does look like an M16, but functionally, you pull the trigger, one bullet comes out each time.
Yeah, but they didn't have the big those hunting rifles don't have 30. How many rounds can you have in a main rifle? Like 6 when you go hunting. So all those pickup truck rifles don't have 30.
Okay, so high magazines, high capacity
big deal.
magazines,
right,
is a factor. Yes, but AR-15s do look like M16s. I mean, the profile is the same, and the cooling thing on the barrel and so forth. It's But they resemble it, but functionally they're not really any different, absent the magazine capacity.
But the popular culture of AR-15s, and I know people have AR-15s, and they're not nutty.
Right.
But overall, when there are millions of these things out there, in the old days, when we were growing up, people didn't, if you could have bought an AR-15, I would say they wouldn't have, because they didn't need it, because you can't use it for hunting. So firearms...
They're pretty accurate, I guess. I've never used one for hunting, but my tenant last year did. And,
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he said they're very accurate.
Well, they're high speed. I mean, they're like 222. It's not like the old, gopher rifles that people would have. Just very high speed, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
but anyway, so the whole, there's a lot of factors, and I don't have.
There are.
I don't have a.
There are.
We don't have answers, obviously, to it, but it definitely is
Well,
afflicting lonely
I don't know
white
that
guys.
anyone does. I mean, and politically, it's a football, and even like the young man in Parkland who got so much notoriety, David Hogg, easy to remember his name, and was strident about the NRA is the problem and so forth. I mean, and pushing gun control, and then left-wing interests who would like to, I think, take away people's guns, gave him a lot of attention, and he got it. There is a movement there, and I would liken it to, say, that's a left-wing issue. The right-wing issue about controlling abortions. Pro-life people would like to eliminate abortions. Gun control people would like to eliminate guns, but neither will say, this is my agenda. I want to reverse abortion, make it illegal, have a federal constitutional amendment making abortion illegal, calling a fetus a human being with rights that would do it. Gun control people want to pull every gun away from everyone except the military and the police, but they won't say that.
Well, I mean, in there
anymore.
Right. I mean, I guess I don't know if the purpose of even saying that is. It's probably true, but I mean, in Australia, wasn't in Australia, like I think it was 1996, they had their big mass shooting, and they basically had this huge program to confiscate guns.
They did.
And Australia is about is a macho society.
Yes.
So.
Not unlike the United States.
No, but we're more so. I mean, we're not. They're not as.
We are more so.
We are less macho. I mean, we're macho, but women have less stature in Australia than like South Africa. I mean, it's just a very macho type of society. It's just the way it is. It's not that big a deal. I guess the point I'm making is that they're not a bunch of lefty, soft-headed people in Australia. They just decided that everybody doesn't need guns, so they bought. I think they bought like a zillion of them back. Is one way they did it. So
they did, yeah. But there's a lot of people who are rural there. I mean, I don't know how that went down, but if you.
But the point, I guess the point is that even though you're lefties, nobody is saying, and maybe in their heart of hearts there are some people, but I think there are a lot of liberal people who want better gun control that really don't have any trouble with people having guns. I mean, nobody's saying it overtly for sure, and certainly if you're Bernie Sanders would probably in his heart of hearts would say get rid of all guns, but not even him. That was one of his weak points when he was running because of the Vermont. I mean, it was an open carry state.
Right.
So I don't think you can anyway paint that. So I don't know. Have we solved this one?
Yeah. Of course we did. We solved everything.
Yeah.
It's just that people don't listen to us. That's the issue.
Or at least the.
All right, let's see. The Mueller investigation, to use an umbrella term, would seem to be unraveling. That is, information about how did this get going, and who was involved, and different people being exposed for having lied under oath in some cases, including former FBI director
Comey?
Yes, James Comey, and James Brennan, not under oath. I can't point to an under oath one yet, but I think it's out there. James Clapper certainly has lied under oath. Assistant Director McCabe has been fired already for other things, but he's lied under oath 3 or 4 different times at least. The impending Inspector General report is any day now. We've been hearing any day now or any week now since early March, but I guess it's really going to come out. Part of it came out when McCabe was fired by Sessions. He did release what he had on McCabe, at least, and it was a pretty comprehensive case for firing him. But the rest of it is mostly going to pertain, as I understand, is mostly going to pertain to what did DOJ under Obama and FBI do during the Hillary Clinton investigation, do and not do. And so it has, knowing that that's coming out, and is expected to be quite comprehensive and damning of Comey and maybe also Loretta Lynch, that mainstream media publications, especially the Washington Post and the New York Times, are putting out stuff now to kind of mitigate that, to try and, knowing it's coming and it's going to be not going to be good, putting out stuff. Well, okay, there was an informant, so they're using the term informant as opposed to spy within the Trump campaign, beginning in, say, July of 2016. And
how did that informant start, by the way?
well, that's a big question.
It started because Papadopoulos was drunk in Australia, and he was mouthing off to the Australian ambassador, and the Australian ambassador told the FBI, and they started looking into it. So, I mean, you got to put, I don't know where you're going with all this, but I think it is unraveling. I think Trump is getting more and more nervous. That's why probably Mueller's going to get fired. There's going to be another Saturday night massacre. That's why probably Rosenstein's going to get fired. I mean, it also, you know, before the election, and everybody, you can blame Comey, but they were investigating Trump and they were investigating Clinton, and it was Comey who came out with the Clinton letter that basically lost her the election. If they were to come out with the same stuff about the Russian connections with Trump before the election, he probably would have lost. So it's all, I mean, Trump to this day doesn't even acknowledge that the Russians were screwing around with the election. Whether it was supporting him or not, he doesn't acknowledge it, and all the intelligence agencies do. I mean, it's just, to me, the reason why he's squirming so much is they're getting closer and closer and closer. They've had, the Trump campaign had what, like 60 or 70 contacts with Russians? In any other campaign, if they would have had one contact, they would have gone to the FBI, and they didn't. You know, meeting in 2016 and the Trump Tower with the Russians. I mean, all these connections that they've had. So, I don't know what your point is, but
Okay,
I think,
some of the things you brought up. The Australian ambassador who met with Papadopoulos. Now, Papadopoulos was I think a 24-year-old kid.
he was part of the inner circle.
It was just announced that he was going to be hired by the Trump campaign. I think it was early to mid-March, that
Okay.
the Trump campaign was saying, well, people were asking the Trump, you don't have anybody for national security or international relations in your campaign. So they seem to have scrambled and named Carter Page, George Papadopoulos, and about 4 or 5 others, because to fill that need.
All right, but how many 24-year-olds could talk to the ambassador of Australia if he wasn't high up in the campaign?
First of all, the Australian ambassador, Alexander Downer is his name. He was involved with the Uranium One deal. He was involved in $25 million contribution to the Clinton campaign. So there's an overlap between Alexander Downer and the campaign on the Democrat side. Now, is that a coincidence? Maybe. You know, it's not a smoking gun. Doesn't mean that he was, you know, conniving. Papadopoulos had been visited earlier by somebody named, what's his name?
But this stuff gets so far in the weeds. I mean, I don't know if your viewers like this, but this is like so arcane to talk about this. I mean, do you think the Russians screwed around with the election?
I think they tried to, and I think they tried to. They've tried to screw around with U.S. elections for decades.
Okay, but I mean, this is the first time. You've said this before, and they've tried it 30 years ago and 40 years ago, but this is the first time they've had the power of social media. Different ball game.
Everyone's had the power of social media.
No, I mean, literally, everyone's had the power of social media, but social media has only been available to affect a lot of people in this last election cycle, basically.
All right.
So they were just really good at it. I mean,
The Russians were better at
The Russians are
others.
better at it. I mean, they did that, and they favored Trump.
Okay, you mentioned the Trump Tower meeting. The Trump Tower meeting was a female Russian lawyer. I can't remember her name right now.
She admitted to be part. She first it was about adoption, and then she admitted that it wasn't the case, that she's a government operative.
That's right. And that she met with the head of Fusion GPS. No, yeah, Fusion GPS. She met with him just before this meeting and just after this meeting. Fusion GPS, which had been hired first by the Obama administration in its 2012 campaign, then by Never-Trumpers in the Republican Party, then by the Hillary Clinton campaign. And it was very active, and they hired Christopher Steele to come up with the Trump dossier. So that he met with this Russian lawyer just prior to and just after to brief her and then debrief her, it would seem. Is that just a coincidence? I don't think so. And then it was pointed at as, this, and I, watching this whole investigation for over a year now, I would say that was the only evidence of possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And it was circumstantial.
Not Manafort, he's been indicted. Not Flynn, who's over there. Not Carter
Manafort
Page,
is indicted.
who was, operative over, and I don't think he was an operative, but he's in lecturing
Manafort
over
worked
in Russia.
for the Ukrainians who were favorable to the Russians.
Campaign manager. He was a campaign manager of.
Right.
Of,
right. But
can you imagine if Obama had done something like that? And I mean, it's just unbelievable that there's such a double standard with this.
What started this campaign? Now, you claim that it was the Australian ambassador in briefing the FBI about his meeting with Papadopoulos, who said the Russians have hacked, are in possession of some Democrat or Hillary Clinton emails. Now, are those the emails that were hacked from the Democrat Party under Debbie Wasserman Schultz, or were they the emails that some of those 30,000 emails that Hillary burned away from her private server? We don't know. It could have been some of one, could have been the other, could have been neither.
What do you think about Trump using his cell phones that are unsecured? Have you heard about that one?
To what, tweet?
Yeah. They're telling him don't use, he's using cell phones, and here you are criticizing Hillary for using a private server, and he's just using like AT&T.
Well, because what she did was illegal. She had classified information on a private server.
What the president does? Do you think that's good behavior and responsible behavior of the president?
I think that it's kind of a red herring that you're bringing up there.
They were using. You don't think anything?
That is illegal. That is patently illegal. It's felonious, actually, to not secure highly classified information. And it was. She said, "Oh, it was a mistake. It was a mistake." And then destroying 30,000 emails that had been subpoenaed by the Congress. That's a crime. There were crimes committed by Hillary Clinton, and Comey as much as admitted it when he had his July 6th
He said
press
it was
conference.
sloppy. He said she was sloppy.
He changed the wording from the statute's wording, which was a certain phrase, very sloppy or whatever, but it was. He didn't have, and he cited her intent. She had no intent to do this. Maybe that's true, to allow, to be sloppy, but she was, and the statute for triggering that did not require intent. Witness the guy that Trump recently pardoned, who was took a picture with his iPhone of something in this submarine that he worked at to show his family what he was doing. And he went to jail. He was in the slammer for over a year, lost his pension, lost everything.
But they were looking at,
and now that's a low-ranking guy. That's not Hillary Clinton.
I knew we couldn't get through a year, this hour without you bringing up Hillary Clinton, because we can't talk about Trump, and we don't want to talk about George Bush, because we get two bookends of terrible presidents. So we got to go back to Hillary, who apparently has not been a president as far as I know. But even I can remember last summer, or 2 summers ago, and going through the Hillary emails, they were looking at the small C's to see where that was confidential. And I mean, come on.
Why did she have a private server in the first place?
It was just convenient for her.
That's what she said.
Yeah.
And I don't buy that, though.
I don't buy that Trump is just using his own phones when his intelligence agency is saying don't do it.
Well, if he uses his own phones, he's tweeting, and that goes out into Twitter world, wherever. I mean,
I don't know what else is using his phone. They can hack his phone.
Oh, I see. So you think there might be some other stuff on his phone that's
It's a
confidential?
phone. It's not a secure phone. He's got it with him.
We don't know that.
You get lost, they're going to find you with your phone. What are the Russians going to do? What's anybody going to do with somebody's not secure phone?
I think that's a stretch.
I don't. Well, go ahead. Can we move on to another subject?
It's coming down. When this IG report comes out, Hillary's going to be big in the news again because it's mostly about that.
Only
And
on this show.
You claim you claim that Comey lost her the election. I would say just the opposite. I would say that Comey was involved in getting her off of what would have been an indictment or a series of indictments for the crimes that she committed. And that's what his job was.
He didn't
His
say they were crimes.
job
He never
was,
said they were crimes. You're saying they're crimes. Comey said they weren't crimes. He didn't say they were crimes. I don't think he said they were crimes.
we know they were crimes.
You know they were crimes. Comey doesn't know,
She
but
violated
you know.
the statute. The same way
didn't meet the
that that
test.
poor kid on the
You're
on the-
comparing apples to apples or apples to
Oh, I'm not.
submarines.
It was
Why didn't
definitely
Comey? So
a crime.
you're saying Comey. Okay, Esquire, thank you very much.
Well, according to
Not Comey.
Andrew
though, not the FBI.
McCabe, according to Andrew McCarthy, former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, it was a crime. It was a federal crime. She violated the statute.
Not according to
many
Comey, and he
times.
was the lead investigator in this. I don't know. I mean, you're always going to find somebody.
Andrew McCabe, the now fired deputy director, was the lead investigator who reported to Comey on that case. It looks like this. Okay, you think that it's you don't think it's consequential. You think Trump is squirming? I would say no. I think
Okay, we'll
Trump is
find
going to
out.
be triumphant.
Next month when I come back.
I think that Hillary is squirming, and the rest, and Loretta Lynch is squirming, and several others, and James Brennan, former CIA director.
We'll find
is
out. I mean,
squirming,
we haven't heard from
and we'll
Stormy
see.
Daniels in a while, so that's that stuff will be coming out. And then I guess they were after the taxi driver today. I heard that on the news this morning. I mean, with
Yeah, a Russian taxi driver. I heard that on
because
NPR.
he's
I
going to
think
flip
it was.
because they let him off. So Cohen's going to be. It's going to be interesting. All this stuff is interesting. So how long do you think Trump will last? Another 6 months, maybe? A year? We'll make a bet.
I hope Trump can be his own worst enemy, as we've discussed before, and he can take a good situation and screw it up.
He just has no regard for the institutions. I think that's the troubling part. I mean, there was a piece where Leslie Stahl, 60 Minutes,
I know who she is, yeah.
she's part of the left-wing conspiracy, but off camera the summer before, after he was nominated, she had talked to him and said, like, okay, you won the nomination, like, why do you keep trashing the media? Like, what's the point? And he just said, I do it to discredit them, because when I want something that I don't, I know it's not going to be good for me, I want them to be discredited. Like, he's smart. He's throwing the institution of First Amendment under the bus, but he's smart in terms of getting his way, like a dictator. So he's undermining these institutions, and I think you should be. I don't understand why that doesn't bother you.
Institutions like the media.
Like the media, like the Justice Department. I mean, what else is there? I mean, they're all Republicans in the Justice Department and the FBI, and he's trashing them.
I would say that we discussed in the last time you were a guest here about media bias, and I listened to your case. I'm not persuaded that there is a rampant left-wing media bias, that mainstream media is in the pocket of Democrats and has been for quite a while, but is blatantly so since the Obama administration
That's just
in
that's just your
2009.
own paranoid opinion, Tom.
And I think that is why Donald Trump is trashing mainstream media.
The New York Times comes out with a piece, and Donald Trump says it's fake news, and 2 weeks later it turns out to be true. I mean, it just happens time and time. I mean, that's what you believe, and that's fine. You're not gonna.
I'm not going to convince you,
Right.
but I am convinced of it. Yes. So did you have something? Did you want to? I'll go to one more story,
Okay.
and then we'll go to what we were talking about
Sure.
earlier in the show. Okay, before the show started. South Africa. I got this from Russia Today. I didn't know where it was, but it said it was linked on the Drudge Report, and anyway. It's about South African white farmers fleeing the country and going to Australia and being granted asylum, I guess, because according to this story and what I had later found out was Russia Today, there was some legislation passed in South Africa and signed by the president, whose name is Cyril Ramaphosa now. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. He pledged to hand the lands owned by white farmers since the 1600s to black citizens of the country without compensation for the owners. Sounds like something what Cuba was doing, what Venezuela was doing, what Russia did in 1917, 1918, what Rhodesia did, well, now Zimbabwe. Yeah. But the most disturbing part would be last year, 82 people were killed in a record 423 farm attacks, and there have been 109 attacks and more than 15 murders so far in 2018. So I guess not a good situation. In South Africa, when the white minority government was toppled or agreed to give up power or some combination of that, and Mandela was brought in, and that Desmond Tutu got the Nobel Peace Prize. He's an Anglican archbishop, and they avoided bloodshed. They were able to have it, transition that government, and there was real oppression going on, as we know, under apartheid, and there's black anger in the African National Congress, and to have avoided this kind of thing then was a real accomplishment, and transition to to a more democratic government. But now it would seem that more extremists are getting involved, and it won't be good for the country. And but I didn't hear this from anywhere else. Now the Russia Today source is that would raise a question in my mind, and I just saw it really this morning, so I'm going to keep an eye on that.
Well, who is was it Zuma? Was he the president they just lost? Is that the president of South Africa that just lost the election?
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally violent, corrupt. I mean, I know very little about
the new one.
Well, Zuma was. Oh. I don't know the name of this guy, and I don't know enough to speak about it, but it's an awful, terrible situation, and South Africa is just incredibly violent. In Johannesburg, remember the guy with the what's his name, who shot his girlfriend through the door?
Oh yeah, the one with no legs.
Amputee. Yeah. I heard a friend of mine was from South Africa, and she said it's just so violent in town. Like when you go into like a shopping mall, like a parking garage, and on the way out they'd have signs that say, "Make sure nobody's following you home." And this idea of when he shot his girlfriend, I guess he was convicted eventually, right? I think he was convicted. But
first exonerated, then convicted, I think. Yeah.
But she knew of the stories that didn't make international headlines, of other stories like somebody she knew, like the guy shot his daughter because he thought they were stealing their family car. I mean, it was just hair trigger violence, crazy place. It's too bad. It's sad. I don't think we have the answers for that. But
yeah, well, none of our business really at this point, unless they kidnap Americans or something. Okay, so before the show, we were chatting, and Mark mentions the flower show, the home show at Freiburg Fair last weekend. And that you bought it, so it's a corporation, or it's a kind of business entity.
Yeah, we bought it, and I don't mean to have this be a plug for the Home and Garden Show.
Well, no,
sponsored by the Conway Daily Sun, but the Conway Daily Sun bought the show,
right.
And so this is our first year putting it on. And Tom and I were chatting, and so it takes a fair amount of energy putting on an event like that, and that's not our expertise in the newspaper business. So it was kind of a challenge and kind of fun. But why I brought it up was because of the cannabis. And so we had 170 exhibitors there, 20 of which were cannabis-related products and services. And when we first announced it, people said, "Oh my gosh, you can't do that. It's Freiburg, it's conservative," and all that. And it turned out it really made the show. It was like the most popular building by far.
All of them in one exhibit
Well, we got
hall.
like 5 buildings. We have
Yeah.
5 buildings. But they're, oh no, we put all the cannabis people together.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a couple of the highlights were like many of the other exhibitors after the show said, we want to be next to the cannabis people next year because they had so much traffic.
Huh.
The cannabis people liked it because they usually go to shows where there's only cannabis people, right? So this is a mixed show with all the tomato plants and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So they just had a whole new audience to educate. And the other takeaway was, and someone had told me, an older fellow had told me that a couple of his friends, older people, were told by their doctors they should go to the show to talk to these people about medicinal uses of it. And that's what we were talking about, is just the huge, how it's just becoming overwhelmingly a major factor. One is on the legalization front, as we know, because Maine is now, the legislature just overrode Governor LePage's veto, so they are going to start to sell it. It's going to be, retail sales is going to be allowed starting in 2019, and we were saying that the towns have the jurisdiction to do what they want. So Freiburg, all the Maine towns, but Freiburg, since they've been in the forefront with this a little bit, will decide in June I'm sure there'll be options on the ballot in June as to how they want to proceed. You know, whether they want to allow, they can fine tune it to allow 2 retail stores, no retail stores, grow houses, or no grow houses. I know there's a couple big ones in Bridgeton that the selectmen are allowing, like a couple of them. I don't know the details of that. And it's huge because not only is it recreational, which we all know, so that's one chunk. So compared to alcohol, which is really only recreational, so you have the recreational piece of cannabis, and that's the kind of the term. If you say pot, you know, it's not accepted because it's like saying booze instead of alcohol. You know, it's a little bit of a pejorative. So cannabis is the word. And then you have the whole market of this medicinal stuff. And there were people over there who had creams and so forth.
Got to shut my phone off. Go ahead.
And they had, you know, creams, and honest to gosh, I knew 3 or 4 people that had just put the cream on their arthritic hands and they felt better. Now, how much of it was psychosomatic, but many people did. And people were buying these $35 things of cream. So then you have that second piece, and then the third piece of it is
$35 for
a little
thing of
cream. Yeah, and it's got this stuff called CBD, and we'll get into the weeds, no pun intended. But then the third piece is homegrown market. I mean, you're not going to brew your own beer, you know, distill your own whiskey at home, but obviously you can grow marijuana at home. So in terms of how it's going to affect the economy, you've got these 3 big pieces: recreation, medicinal, and homegrown. And those were people who were represented at the show. We had people, seeds, you can actually buy seeds now legally. Grow lights, fertilizer, I mean, it's like tomato plants.
Yeah, I go by something on Forest Avenue, you know, that sells all those products on my way back each week, and it's big business. It can be, and has been in Colorado. How much of the cannabis aspect of it motivated you to buy this, you know, invest in this show? Was that the
That
factor?
was the big factor.
It was.
The show itself was Carla Ficker, and people know Carla Ficker. She ran it for 15 years, and I don't know how she did it by herself, frankly. I mean, it's just this huge undertaking. So, and you know, she wanted out. She'd been done it all this time, and so the show had been kind of flat over the last couple of years. And to me, it was I'm not in the event business or the tomato plant business or that kind of thing. So it seemed like the cannabis was really the only way to really jumpstart it. Now, we did a couple other things. We had oysters and some fun stuff, and we're going to expand on that. So I'm kind of skewing it a little bit by just talking about cannabis.
Yeah.
But it really was the driver, and that's the reason we get in. And I think next year, God willing, instead of having 20 exhibitors, we'll probably have 50. And the fact that it's a mixed show of having, because most places it doesn't work. You know, why would you put gardening, tomato plants and flowers, you know, with cannabis? So you go to the boat show, you don't see cars at a boat show, right? I mean,
well, you grow stuff. I mean, people do
it's related.
grow it.
Yeah. So you do get an organic crowd. But we also have tractors. Profile Motors is there with their tractors. They sold a bunch of tractors and all that. So
farm related, growing related. Right?
Yeah. Home, garden, landscapers. I mean, products. I mean, there's a whole, like hemp. There's a whole bunch of related.
I meant to ask you that. So there were people selling it for the fibrous qualities
clothing.
of the plant? Clothing. I see. Was that mostly people who smoke it would like say, "Well, this shirt is made of." You know,
No,
is it-
I mean,
is
I
it
think
more
hemp,
like that, or-
hemp is a, I don't, you're gonna ask, I don't know this, I can't be a hemp salesperson. I don't know enough about it, but it's just a
Yeah.
very versatile, strong rope and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
And it was
right.
outlawed, as you know. It was used to be legal, now it was outlawed, now it's
yeah.
it's gonna be legal again.
Yeah.
So all those type of things. And it's this, they have do you ever heard of CBD? CBD is the because it's the non-psycho, what they call, marijuana is psychoactive,
Yeah.
right?
Gets you high.
It gets you high.
Yeah.
And so the CBD part of it is the non-psychoactive part.
Okay.
And so you can take it and have edibles, candies and all that.
Yeah.
Makes you sleepy. So that's, people take it to
Yeah.
relax themselves.
Yeah.
And then so there's a whole array of those products that are now legal to sell everywhere. And sell them downtown. Deb Jensen sells them downtown, the CBD products.
in New Hampshire.
Yeah, you get 50 states because it doesn't have the psychoactive part of the
Okay.
marijuana.
Oh, all right. So it didn't require an act of the legislature to make it
No,
to sell
it's
that
legal
stuff.
now, and we could. That's why that's why all those products were sold at the fair, because in Maine you can't sell. You can't sell marijuana in Maine unless you have a medical card. So you will next spring, but you can't now. So it is a kind of funny thing. It's sort of like we always say, like in Tamworth, you can buy fireworks in Tamworth, but you can't fire them off. It's illegal to fire them off. So you can possess marijuana in Maine, but you can't buy it. Where do you get it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. All right.
So what do you think about it? Do you think it should be legal?
I know it can't be enforced, and it isn't being enforced practically. So it has been de facto legal for a while, and then it's not. Laws against it are not enforced. I don't think it's good for people to smoke, and I think it will. In Colorado, some reports I've read where they've been a few years now down this road, that their traffic issues have become people probably under the influence, but there's no real way of measuring it. You can't. There are ways of measuring the amount of whether you've been smoking marijuana,
Right.
but that doesn't mean you were high. I guess it can be in your system for a month after you
Right.
smoked it the first time, but you stop being high the next day. So they don't know how to regulate or have traffic cops file suit against somebody like they can with alcohol. So that's a problem, and traffic problems are going up. But mostly as a former teacher, I'd be concerned about younger people using it at a younger and younger age, and I don't think it's good for them, especially a developing brain.
No,
It's one
I
thing,
agree.
One thing for an adult, to use it occasionally, and I think, I'm not going to. I know a lot of people who do, and they seem to function just fine. But that's an issue. And I think those who use it regularly, I guess it's not good for them. And I've known a lot of people who've used it regularly for decades, and I've watched them, as those that are still alive and that are my age, I'd call them burnouts.
Yeah, they're potheads.
Yeah.
And you put all the potheads on this side and all the alcoholics on this side, and not doing a lot of anything isn't very good for you.
But
for sure.
alcoholics probably did. Because
They probably did.
by the time they reach their
Yeah.
60s, my
Yeah.
age, whereas you can survive a long time on, if you use marijuana
It's a little
every day
spacey.
that way, yeah, it's not going to kill you. So in that sense, it's not as bad, as alcohol. if
And the
it's
driving
abused.
piece, that is one of the challenges, but it's just kind of funny is that at least the one good thing is if you get drunk and drive, you drive 80 miles an hour. You get stoned and drive, you drive 25 miles an hour.
That's a point. Okay. Oh boy. This is a couple of months old. I've had it. This is my show prep, and I carry these things over every 2 weeks. But Radio Canada, it's a directive. A directive from the Canadian government instructing Service Canada employees, the government employees, to avoid the use. Stay away from such terms as Mr., Mrs., father, and mother, and, quote, use gender-neutral language or gender-inclusive language. And that is disturbing to me, especially where there was a directive that instructed people in public institutions that is working, public institutions. If somebody says to you, if you said, well, I'm not a male anymore, I'm not a female either, I'm something on the so-called gender spectrum, and I don't want you to call me he, she, or they, I want you to call me Z, Z-H-E, or I can make up something, then I would thereafter, in addressing you, be required legally to use that pronoun in addressing you, or face fines and possible imprisonment. Now that is what catapulted this guy, maybe you heard of him, Jordan Peterson, into prominence. And he's now got a bestseller, which I've recently finished reading. But it was a bestseller not only in Canada, but all across the English-speaking world. And it was number one for a while. Yeah. Now it's probably number 2 or 3 or 4 on Amazon. And he's called, anyway, he said, no, I'm not going to do that. You cannot, the government cannot tell me what language I must use and what language I won't use. So strictly on that point, that he all of a sudden he was, the left-wing legions call him the, whatever the Canadian equivalent of, they would just make it difficult for him. As he got popular, he was traveling around in speaking engagements and so forth, and he'd be followed by people who would sometimes bang on the windows of whatever venue he was in and even break them to try and shut him up. It's mostly young people or so-called transgenders and their supporters. Now, there aren't very many transgenders. I mean, it's a small percentage of 1% of the population, but their supporters are a much larger percentage of the population. And anyway, that kind of stuff troubles me. I hope it doesn't come down into the U.S., but often does.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think one thing we do need a new pronoun, though. If you write a person takes his car or her car to the store. Like we need a new pronoun. I mean, I'm just being facetious here, but for writing,
I agree with you.
We actually need one because it's always like his, her.
Yes.
So we need one just for writing. Yes. So that would be nice if somebody invented one that we could agree on that's not falls politically. But I agree, this stuff goes so far. We, as you know, we also publish at Portland Phoenix, and one of our restaurant reviewers wrote about, I think it was an Ethiopian restaurant, and some guy criticized the restaurant because they weren't Ethiopian, and they said it was cultural appropriation, as if you're going to have an Ethiopian restaurant, you better be Ethiopian, and that which begs the question: wait a minute, can you have a Irish pub? You have to be O'Malley, So there's no question that it's a very fringe thing, and what really concerns me and you, I know, is that the college campuses, which are supposed to be really the most tolerant places on earth, and many have become the least tolerant, the most intolerant.
Yeah.
And that's very troubling. And there's a backlash. My son's 27 years old. He's way more conservative than me, about this stuff, because he was brought up in that culture, and to him it was just like crazy. And so there is that. This is surprising young conservatives. They're not Trump style, and and we have a reporter, Damon Steer, who's he's in his 30s now, but very much like that. They don't listen to, whether we call it liberal mainstream media, they don't listen to any legacy media. They don't. I mean, it's all internet stuff, which is good and bad, and they tend to be anti-PC. And but at the same time, to me, what's interesting, and I'll use the word progressive in the literal sense and not in the left sense, is that
5 minutes left. Wow.
Is that that they're also just they're tolerant of social issues, which is not a little bit of your thing, but while it's a new breed of conservative that I think that I could relate to, and I'm probably a little past the age, where they're very anti-PC. They have good conservative values, but they're just tolerant. Like the transgender and the gay stuff, that's just part of their multicultural. They're just brought up in it, so to them it's nothing. They don't have the old baggage.
Yeah, interesting that your son would have become this way, or more so this way, in reaction to having been on a campus for 4 years or longer.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah, I can see where that might, and I think that the new, well, I guess maybe it's more my hope than my thought, because I don't have evidence for it yet, but that, you know, having been a college student in the late 60s and the 70s, when it was fringe and cool to be, you know, way over on the left, that the new cool will become to be rejecting of all that, or because, you know, the people I associated with then are now running universities,
Right.
and they are, you know, way over there on that. Still, their politics have gotten even more left-wing in some cases, and so, yeah, I hope that's the case, but I don't know. When I've been to CPAC, and it's been a few years since I've gone down there, I'm going to renew that next spring, but I would mostly, I mean, there'd be, it started 6,000. By the time the last time I went, there were 9,000 people there in one hotel. And they weren't all there for the 3 days, but there were, most of them, like 80%, were young people, college-age people, or just a little bit beyond. And they were very articulate, very smart, and very active, and that was very encouraging to me, because where I live in Maine, you know, is we're on the eastern seaboard, and it's I just, especially going to Portland so much, it's.
And you like Portland. You
I
like
do
Portland.
it.
Did you
I
go
do
there?
like it.
Do you think it's like, is it for you like going to the zoo?
And
looking inside?
sometimes
'Cause
it is.
It just seems like you're
Sometimes.
not a Portland guy.
Well, I am, because there are some people who have a worldview similar to mine, but they tend to stay closeted.
Yeah.
But there's quite a few of them. I mean, it's still a minority, I think. But those who are, you know, out there in public, I mean, are left of center. But I feel like an anthropologist that's out there. You know,
And there are a lot of
looking around.
conservative business people. I know them that do business over there, and they lie low because they know they're not going to win.
Yeah.
You know, it's just
Yeah.
not worth
Right.
it from their business interests. You know,
Sure.
they just don't. So
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, we have a couple of minutes left. This was good, and this went much faster than I would have expected. I don't know how it did for you, but when he held up his hand and said there were 5 minutes left 3 minutes ago, I was quite surprised. I had a lot of things
You and I,
wanted to
we're a
get
fun
to, but,
team.
Yeah, well, I mean,
As long as you don't talk about Hillary and put your viewers to sleep, you know, that's my job. That's all I do, is just try to keep you away from Hillary.
Well, I'm going to keep going there, because it's, she's going to be back in the news front and center,
Yeah.
not for doing speeches at
She
Yale
can't help
either.
herself.
Well, she's going to be in the news, I think, at least her
Oh,
campaign.
your
her campaign.
yeah, yeah.
You know, when the IG report comes
Yeah.
out, the guy's name is Horowitz. He was appointed by Obama, and he's got quite a report coming out. It's going to really shake things up big time. And I think Mueller may be wrapping up his investigation, or at least in negotiations with what's the former New York Mayor Giuliani, you know, about maybe wrapping it up by September 1st. And I think he sees the handwriting on the wall too, and support is diminishing for this whole thing. So we got a minute left, and I don't know, next week, next month you'll be here, and a couple of weeks, I hope. Is that true? That
It's a very enjoyable. You're always a pleasure to be with, and you know, it's not always a pleasure to read your columns, but it's a pleasure to be with you personally.
I'm not so. Yeah, I hear people say, "Well, he's really not so bad as you might think when you read what he writes."
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah,
Right there.
Hey,
Yeah.
it's a free country.
It is.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay,
it's
Don.
a pleasure. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Okay.